I think that the chessboard per se is an ideal representation and calculation that is required going forward in an AI in an agentic age.
I don't think we can think from a two-dimensional test anymore. It's almost like 3 or 4-dimensional if you look at the drivers.
You've got the geopolitical situation.
Yeah.
That's extremely important. That has an influence on a multitude of perspectives and also possibilities.
So when you navigate all these change drivers, you have to think from like a 3 or 4-dimensional.
You do. And I think 4-dimensionally because of development and the stage that we're in. Concrete examples are, again, like vendor, supplier, organization situations, the impact of the EU AI Act, the US AI Action Plan. There's a lot of things that will transpire this year as well that really will demand for 3 and 4-dimensional perspective.
Yeah, and I also think there's a whole generational shift that's happening in workforce and global in general, right? I mean, the leaders that are upper-comers, they're replacing the leaders in their 50s and 60s, and now a lot of the new leaders are in their 30s or 40s.
In this session today, I want to talk about the humanity glitch and why AI is scaling indifference. Now, in my opinion, we've hit a high stakes paradox. The more we automate, the more humanity becomes the ultimate premium. Now, right now, we're at a tipping point. We've seen that employees have been reduced to human capital. It's almost like they've been nodes turned into optimization elements, while customers are just users that companies want to convert. Now, AI, we've come to the conclusion that it is weaponizing this trend. It's scaling indifference across millions of touch points in milliseconds. But as we've discovered, for those willing to pivot back to the biological, the ROI is actually massive. So let's look, first of all, at the state of play. We've got a surge of the multi-agent. So we've got Gartner that's predicting that 40% of enterprise apps that they will actually run on autonomous multi-agent systems. Actually, they're claiming that this will happen by the year's end. They have made a statement that the bots are officially going to be talking to each other. We can also look at the scale of error. So analog mistakes, it's hitting dozens. There's algorithmic flaws, and these are some things that will hit millions of people instantly. We've also got the value leak. So you've seen that profit disappears when you actually neglect the human element, and it will kill both customer loyalty and employee execution. So what we're focusing on today is human-centered design. And we're here to sort of argue and explore that it isn't some soft distraction for idealists. It's the most pragmatic bridge between your tech stack and the results that actually move the needle. So I think we have to explore the concept of maybe stop treating people like machines and start designing for the real unpredictable humans who are actually driving the economy. Faisal, you're back in Zurich.
Glad to be here.
Glad to be here. It's not very nice today. It's actually raining. Is that affecting your mood, or are you ready for our session on what we've just done?
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about this topic because it's very much needed. And as you recall, we wrote this article on human-centric design, but we also, for Fast Company, but we also wrote a piece a while back on IMD. How do you really think about human-centric design? Let me give you a simple example, right? So let's say we want to have, chatbot that interacts with customer because it's more economic and it's more efficient, right? So that's one thought process. Another thought process is that we actually want to have real customer service people, but we will have a chatbot that assists the customer service person to interact with the customers, right? So why does that make a difference? Because as you open up the conversation by saying humans are unpredictable, we're emotional, all that stuff, right? So in that context, when a human talks to another human being, it's not going by patterns. There is some known behavioral things that the customer service people are trained to recognize when customers are talking about some issue or problem. But chatbot can actually help that customer service person by extracting data about that particular customer or a similar situation and become really an assistant. So do you want AI to assist that customer service person to be a better customer service person? Or do you want to replace that person and have a chatbot? Some would argue that actually I'd rather talk to chatbot. Me, being old fashioned, I'd rather talk to a human. And I think there's hardly any substitute for human connection.
So we're getting right into the midst of the technological implementation or a system implementation into an environment where human is at the core or was at the core or possibly should still be at the core. Before we get into the intrinsics and the in-depth analysis of this topic, I just want to make sure that we remember all the humans that are certainly here with us and listening to us. So I'd ask you, don't forget to subscribe to Convergence and join our journey. It's set to be bigger, and we can only do this if you're part of the journey with us. So Faisal, let's get down to it. First of all, we want to actually redefine the terms. Now, the article that you spoke about, it mentions that human-centered design is often dismissed as a softer discipline. How can we help people understand, especially leaders, that it can be reframed as more of a hard financial necessity? And maybe what actually is human-centered design, because that's also like a concept that I think we need to introduce.
Yeah. I mean, look, human-centric design is not a new concept, and Donald Norman is the thinker that coined that term. And the idea is that whatever product that you're designing, that should help the user of the product with the ease and actually should benefit. And it's also very true in architecture, right? As we were just talking before we started this formal recording. When you walk into a space, a building, your mood changes based on the design of the building, right? As an example. So these are design elements thought from the point of how it impacts the emotional response of the user. It's not even functionality, right? It's the emotional response. So to do that in the context of service and software, and then you're talking about semi-intelligent elements in AI, it requires a lot of intention to think from that perspective. Obviously, we want to enhance the customer in that example, enhance the customer experience. But we also want to enhance the person who's providing that service, their capability, so that they can provide a better service. So thinking is not, can I make a chatbot that's better than a human being? The thinking should be, can I do something that will help my customer with a better experience than what they're already having?
I get that point, but if you go back to the question about the financial impact, you could also disregard that and you could say, well, it doesn't really matter about, you talked about the emotional response, like why does it matter about the emotional response?
Sure.
And is it necessary that a leader then looks at the alternative angle, because it's also about governance, it's about a governance perspective? As in human-centered design, it's also a control against, operational, legal, reputational risk. That there has to be the focus that, systems that fail to account for human behavior or cognitive limits of the human mind, that there is a consequence that is financial in that respect. And also, I think that what we need to consider is that if the human-centric element is not taken into account, it can turn into a sort of repercussion that will then be 10 times
the
more.
backfire.
Exactly, from a financial perspective. It's the usability, like post-launch case analysis, where if you're not considering that human, then, you've got a bigger price to pay when you try to redesign it.
I mean, the easy thinking, let's start with the easy thinking. Easy thinking is that if we have lots of automation, we'll have reduction of a lot of redundant process, redundant resource, redundant guidelines, and whatever, right? So is the reduction mentality, right? So from that point of view, that's a very short-term thinking, right? Because when you think from cost cutting, that's not really going at it from, can I make a better product or service than what I have today? So as a result, I can retain my customer and I can have a greater, bigger market share, right? We're thinking from if I reduce my resources, I'll have a higher profit margin. Never works well. Right? I mean, this is an overused example. Think about Starbucks, right? You brought on a CEO saying, okay, a new CEO says, okay, we're going to reduce the number of people that actually hover around. So we'll have more churn of customer that comes and buys coffee and walks away. He forgot the very premise of Starbucks was that it's a destination. People wants to feel that you're in a cafe as if it was in somewhere in Italy. That was the original premise. So the market responded exactly the opposite. So we just don't want to grab a coffee and run away. We want to gather, right? So they went back to the original premise. So this requires a lot more intentional and purpose-driven thought process, and the design starts from that perspective. If you think about cost-cutting point of view, it never turns out, and it's just with AI. We've seen this like with all kind of technology over the years.
It's not just with AI, you're right. And I agree with the example that you've highlighted. But then if we actually move it to this perspective, because you mentioned Donald's Norman, you've mentioned this Norman principle, and it's really, in essence, the idea of paying attention to the needs of human users. Now, when we're looking at human users, the interesting thing that we can take it from the angle and direction of AI and the integration of that into an environment, it's not a uni user.
Right.
So you've got, in the case that we're distinctively making here, you've got the employee and you've got the customer.
Yep.
So when we're thinking of the user as an employee and the user as a customer, then how can you ensure that there's this internal AI human-centered design that suits them both? Because the difference for me there is customers, they typically interact with systems voluntarily, right? And if they're not happy with the design, then they leave through frustration. And, the consequence of that is reputational damage. You've got churn, as you've highlighted in the example of Starbucks. Now, employees, in contrast, they use internal systems, and the feedback loop it's much shorter, and sometimes it doesn't even happen. So then if you don't have that, you get even worse consequences of like non-compliance. You might get shadowing, you might get AI shadowing, other worse consequential issues from not looking at the human-centered design element there. What can we do to prevent that and also make sure that it does stay with this human-centric design approach?
Look, I mean, it's actually a broader context in the sense that whenever you're talking about, implementing these kind of new technology, where it starts falling apart is when you do this isolated pilot project. Right? Because when you do isolated pilot project, you're not really thinking the overall holistic enterprise impact. And you can even go outside of the enterprise because you have to think about the ecosystem, right? So you may say, okay, a chatbot, a customer service chatbot is a great idea, but you're not thinking that how that's going to impact the employees, maybe the suppliers, maybe the customer, maybe where the data source are coming from, et cetera, right? So whenever people think in isolation, any type of design, it becomes a narrow view, and that holistic way of looking at how it's going to impact employee, customer, and not just efficiency gain, but effectiveness, right? There's a difference between efficiency and effectiveness. Yes, it is great efficiency model that Starbucks was thinking of, but it was not very effective with the customers, right? Because they didn't consider the emotional impact that drove the customer to the Starbucks to begin with, right? So it requires that kind of thinking. Other thing about AI is that it's the pace of growth in terms of learning mechanism from the data and the distribution of that data into knowledge or whatever is a lot faster than when we had input-output system and we were mostly doing the decision-making. Once you give up the decision-making to going back to that Gartner prediction that we're going to have lots of agents and, we're turned into mostly agentic enterprise whereby maybe 40 to 50, 60% of our workforces is digital. The flaws and the defects also is a lot faster speed, right? So as much as the speed of efficiency gain is fast, but also the defects and flaws from the data and the pattern recognition is lots higher, right? So all of this requires a much more critical thinking of who are you exactly trying to serve, right? And once you figure that out, then you have to connect that dot with your purpose and, ask yourself, why are you in business to begin with? Is it to cut costs or is it really to build something that supports your customer? If your goal is to cut costs, you'll be for sure out of business sooner or later because you're not really focusing on enhancing your product and service. You're focusing on, how fast can I push out the cheapest product and cheapest service?
So there's so many components of complexity to your answer, interesting strands that we could follow. I think that in the sense of what you are highlighting there is that it's this iterative spiral where, especially in software development, implementation of AI, it's never once and it's done,
Right.
especially with large language models, with the development of large language models, and also the unknown about the space. So it's this iterative spiral in the approach to software development that still needs to be centered around the user and very much the human. If we look at what you're talking about there, it's almost like a paradox of choice.
Yeah.
Like, how can you balance? And I don't even think it's just in this era, you've seen it in different developmental phases of products, but you've always got that conflict. And we know from being practitioners as well, of how do you balance customer listening with expert-led innovation? Because you always have this tension between, user-centric design and also expert-driven innovation. And it's well documented, as you know, in innovation research, but users are generally not that good at identifying, articulating their pain points. They're not good expressing, this is my unmet need, and this is how I want it to translate into a solution, an optimal solution that will actually assess that pain point. And then you've got the direct demand of the user that sometimes ends up in a fallacy where they're almost trapped in a problem identification that has not been expert-led enough. So we need to think about, how can we rely on the outcomes of listening to the customer better and making sure that it fits the demand.
So look, it starts with this paradoxical thing that users are rational, right? I mean, human beings are
Are
not.
you saying they're not rational?
Or human condition is not rational, right? I mean, most of us respond emotionally in most situations, right? And then we try to become rational and we try to use logic and data and other type of things to make a better decision. So if you look at AI, that's really a data-driven model. Now, maybe someday it'll be able to start breaking patterns, but we're not quite there yet. We are where we are, right? So you have to start from that point of view. Second is this, expert-led innovation versus user telling you what they need. There's a fine balance to it, right? Because especially when you're introducing new product or services, the user doesn't even know that they want that product or services. But whoever is coming up with that product or services, they usually come from deep observation of human being with those particular problem set, right? So for example, when we had those phones that was stuck on the wall and we had to get to the phone to make a call. That's kind of saying, oh, that's great. We made the connectivity, but we need the connectivity anywhere and everywhere. Hence the mobile phone, right? So we didn't know that we needed a mobile phone. Most of us didn't know that we needed a mobile phone. Now we can't live without one, right? And then mobile phone turned into a smartphone and, goes on and on and on and on. So whoever is designing those things, our original idea might have come from observation, right? Any of these things. got better, that are successful product, that actually comes from the user's input because it's, I don't like this, I can't use this.
Yeah.
The buttons are too big. I have to key this, do that, right? Why can't I just use my finger? And now people say, why do I have to even use my finger? Why can't I just talk to it? Right? Just so on and so forth. So it's that expert-led innovation and, user telling you what they need. The good design comes from observation, deep observation of behavioral and emotional response of the user, but also listening to the users and user meaning customers or whatever user meaning. And you have to go through this iterative spiral way of looking at it and constantly enhance it, right?
Yeah.
Ultimately, you also have to question, if you're a business, you have to question what's your purpose and who are you trying to serve. So, for example, if you say, look, I manufacture windows, right? And I'm going to create the highest quality windows and I'm going to AI enable my company so my customer can decide what type of window, what size of window they want to use in their home, and a AI assistant will assist them. And then when the AI assistant cannot satisfy them, they may call an expert from the people. So if you look at this just simple example, it's a combination of collection of a lot of people and personas, right? People meaning the people within the company, but persona meaning a dedicated contextual automation with intelligence, which is basically an agent, but it's a persona which is contextual. It's not broader persona. So the more contextual and focused you can make a persona, the better off you will be in implementing this kind of thing because it becomes assist versus doing. I think, it's just my personal opinion, I think the minute you lose that perspective and say, hey, I can just produce a lot more windows, then you've lost your purpose. If your purpose was that I'm going to build the highest quality window that I could possibly build.
So 2 things that we certainly need to dive into more in the next session, Faisal, is this persona strategy, because as you're suggesting, AI should have different personalities, and it should have different personalities probably as well for not only the user, but for stakeholders. Also looking at the personas involved in the design itself that bring out the intensification of the persona strategy. And one other thing that we want to end on is maybe we can just design for the irrational.
And by the way, that is human being. I mean, it's why do you have 1,000 different kind of foods?
Yeah.
Right?
Adapting to human emotion.
Right.
Adapting to biases, and also making sure that they don't end up in our system.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.